both stars in their own right. The acclaimed author, Lauren Groff, and the artist, Anastasia Samoylova, who headlines our current exhibition, Florida's Anastasia Samoylova and Walker Evans. The exhibition, which I hope you'll come back to the museum to visit as soon as possible. We open at 10 tomorrow morning, so be here. I'll see you there at 10. The exhibition brings together photographs and mixed media works by Anastasia and by the 20th century American photographer Walker Evans, two artists of different generations who both sought to visualize Florida's incredible complexity and contradictions. When he first traveled to Florida in 1934, Evans wrote to a friend, "Florida is ghastly and very pleasant where I am." I think that's it's still true today, I think, for anyone who's been there recently. He returned repeatedly over the next 40 years, creating a very little-known body of work depicting the state's unique natural and cultural landscape. Anastasia has been photographing Florida since 2016, when she moved to Miami with her family. Born in southern Russia and raised in Moscow, she started out studying environmental design, and her interest in the social landscape and multi-layered architectural spaces has certainly carried over into her photographic work. Her Florida's project grew out of an earlier book and series of exhibitions called Flood Zone, which looked at the problem of rising sea levels in the southern United States. But like Evans, she became fascinated with the beauty and strangeness of Florida, its shimmering play of reality and illusion, of sunshine and darkness. I'm also very pleased to welcome Lauren Groff, whose work also delves into the swampy darkness of the Sunshine State. I know that her short story collection, Florida, has been an important inspiration for Anastasia throughout her work on her project, and the inspiration is mutual. In 2022, Lauren wrote a story entitled Mirror Venus, which was inspired by Anastasia's photograph of the same title, and which was published in the book version of Florida's in 2022. Lauren is the author of 7 books of fiction, including the award-winning story collection Florida and the novels Fates and Furies, The Matrix, and The Vaster Wilds, which is now out in paperback. She's a 3-time finalist for the National Book Award, and her fiction has been translated into 36 languages. She lives with her family in Gainesville, Florida, where just this year she opened an independent bookstore called The Lynx, after the Florida Wildcat, which emphasizes banned books and BIPOC, LGBTQ, and Florida-based authors. I'm going to keep these introductions short because I want to get to the meat of the program. If you have any other questions, you can Google these these artists. They are both very well documented online. So I'm going to now, we're going to have 2 presentations. Lauren is going to come up and talk and read, and then Anastasia is going to talk about her work, and then we will all convene for a conversation on the folding chairs. Lauren Groff, welcome to the Met, and let's please welcome her to the stage.
So as I speak, some of Anastasia's photos are going to be showing. How many people are from Florida? Oh, look at this. Look at all these people. Hi. You moved to Sanity. Florida, I want to defend. Florida, I want to throw into the drink, right? Florida is a place that inspires everything in me, rage and sadness and profound aesthetic pleasure. And the story of Florida that I grew up knowing in upstate New York is probably the story that those of you who are not Floridians think of, right? It's just weird. It's, reactionary, especially right now. There's a lot of authoritarianism happening on the ground. And Florida Man is a figure that sort of represents, he's like the superhero of the state who bites ears off of people under underpasses. But that is a very narrow vision of a state that's enormously large. And in terms of geography, the state of Florida is larger than Greece or North Korea. In terms of population, if we were a European country, we'd be the 9th largest, ahead of Romania. So we're enormous. And there are as many stories coming out of Florida as there are Floridians. And I think the job of the artist is to subvert some of the stories that are prominent or preeminent, and to tell a more complicated thing, which is why I love so much the things that you're doing. I love so much these images that sort of tell the story of Florida, but then tweak it and make it deeper and make it stranger and make it more interesting. There are so many great artists coming out of Florida right now that are doing this work as well. So in terms of visual art, Allison Janae Hamilton, who's a brilliant, she's an African-American sculptor. In terms of writing, of course, we have Edwidge Danticat down in Miami. We have Patricia Engel. We have Karen Russell. We have so many brilliant artists always pushing and trying to make the narrative of what we see deeper, stranger, not the same. So my Florida is different from Anastasia's Florida. My Florida is way darker and swampier. We don't have beaches where I am, which, why would you live in Florida without them? So I'm going to read a little bit from a short story that sort of demonstrates my Florida. And then I'm done after this. So this is from a story called Ghosts and Empties. I have somehow become a woman who yells, and because I do not want to be a woman who yells, whose little children walk around with frozen, watchful faces, I have taken to lacing on my running shoes after dinner and going out into the twilit streets for a walk, leaving the undressing and sluicing and reading and singing and tucking in of the boys to my husband, a man who does not yell. The neighborhood goes dark as I walk, and a second neighborhood unrolls atop the daytime one. We have few streetlights, and those I pass under make my shadow frolic. It lags behind me, gallops to my feet, gambols on ahead. The only other illumination is from the windows and the houses I pass, and the moon that orders me to look up, look up. Feral cats dart underfoot, bird of paradise flowers poke out of the shadows, smells are exhaled into the air, oak dust, slime mold, camphor. Northern Florida is cold in January, and I walk fast for warmth, but also because, although the neighborhood is antique, huge Victorian houses radiating outward into 1920s bungalows, then mid-century modern ranches at the edges, it's imperfectly safe. There was a rape a month ago. A jogger in her 50s pulled into the azaleas. And a week ago, a pack of loose pit bulls ran down a mother with a baby in her stroller and mauled both, though not to death. It's not the dog's fault, it's the owner's fault, dog lovers shouted on the neighborhood email list. And it's true, it was the owner's fault. But also, those dogs were sociopaths. When the suburbs were built in the 70s, the historic houses in the center of the town were abandoned to graduate students who heated beans over Bunsen burners on the heart pine floors and sliced apartments out of ballrooms. When neglect and humidity caused the houses to rot and droop and develop rusty scales, there was a second abandonment to poor people, squatters. We moved here 10 years ago because our house was cheap and had virgin lumber bones, and because I decided that if I had to live in the South with its boiled peanuts and its Spanish moss dangling like armpit hair, at least I wouldn't barricade myself with my whiteness in a gated community. During our first months in the house, we hosted a homeless couple we only ever saw slinking off in the dawn. At dusk, they would silently lift off the latticework to the crawl space under our house and sleep there. Their roof, our bedroom floor, and when we got up in the middle of the night, we tried to walk softly because it felt rude to step inches above the face of a dreaming person. On my nighttime walks, the neighbors' lives reveal themselves, the lit windows' domestic aquariums. At times, I'm the silent witness to fights that look like slow dancing without music. It is astonishing how people live, the messes they sustain, the delicious whiffs of cooking that carry to the street, the holiday decorations that solely seep into daily decor. All January, I watched a Christmas bouquet of roses on one mantel diminish until the flowers were a blighted shrivel and the water green scum, a huge Santa on a stick still beaming merrily out of the ruins. Window after window nears, freezes with its blue fog of television light or its couple hunched over a supper of pizza, holds as I pass, then slides into the forgotten. I think of the way water gathers as it slips down an icicle's length, pauses to build its glossy drop, becomes too fat to hang on, plummets down. There is one mostly windowless place in the neighborhood, a yellow brick monstrosity that I love nevertheless because it houses nuns. There used to be 6 nuns there, but attrition happened, as it does with very old ladies, and now there are only 3 kindly sisters squeaking around that immense space in their sensible shoes. A realtor friend told us that when it was built in the 1950s, a bomb shelter was lowered into the porous limestone of the backyard. And during sleepless nights when my body is in bed, but my brain is still out walking in the dark, I like to imagine the nuns in their full regalia in their shelter, singing hymns and spinning on a stationary bike to keep the light bulbs sputtering on, while above ground all has been blasted black and rusted hinges rasp the wind. Because the nights are so cold, I share the streets with few people. There's a young couple who jog at a pace slightly slower than my fast walk. I follow them, listening to their patter of wedding plans and fights with friends. Once I forgot myself and laughed at something they said, and their faces owled, unnerved, back at me. Then they trotted faster and took the first turn they found, and I let them disappear into the black. There's an elegant, tall woman who walks a Great Dane the color of dryer lint. I'm afraid that the woman is unwell because she walks rigidly, her face pulsing as if intermittently electrified by pain. I sometimes imagine how, should I barrel around a corner to find her slumped on the ground, I would drape her over her dog, smack his withers, and watch as he, with his great dignity, carried her home. There is a boy of 15 or so, tremendously large, whose shirt is always off and who is always on the treadmill in his glassed-in porch. No matter how many times I find myself sailing past his window, there he is, his footsteps pounding so hard I can hear them from 2 blocks away. Because all the lights are on, to him there is nothing beyond the black in the window, and I wonder if he watches his reflection the way that I watch him, if he sees how with each step his stomach ripples as if it were a pond into which someone had tossed a fist-sized stone. There's the shy, muttering, homeless lady, a collector of cans, who hoists her clanging bags on the back of her bicycle and uses the old carriage blocks in front of the grander houses to mount her ride. The waft of her makes me think of the wealthy southern dames in dark silk, who once used those blocks to climb into their carriages, emitting a similarly intimate feminine smell. There's the man who hisses nasties as he stands under the light outside a bodega with bars over its windows. I put on my don't fuck with me face, and he has yet to do more than hiss, but there's a part of me that is more than ready, that wants to use what's building up. Sometimes I think I see the stealthy couple who lived under our house, the particular angle of his solicitousness, his hand on her back. But when I come closer, it's only a papaya tree bent over a rain barrel, or 2 boys smoking in the bushes who turn wary as I pass. And then there's the therapist who every night sits at his desk in the study of his Victorian, which looks like a rotting galleon. He was caught in bed with the wife of one of his patients. The patient had a loaded shotgun out in the car. The wife died in coitus, and the therapist survived with the bullet still in his hip, which makes him lurch when he gets up to pour himself more scotch. There are rumors that he visits the cuckolded murderer in prison every week, though whether his motive is kindness or crowing remains in the shadows, as if motives could ever be pure. My husband and I had just moved in when the murder occurred. We were scraping rotting paint off the oak moldings in our dining room when the gunshot splattered the air. But of course, we believed that they were fireworks lit by the kids who lived a few houses down. As I walk, I see strangers, but also people I know. I look up in the beginning of February to see a close friend in a pink leotard in her window stretching. But then, with a zip of understanding, I realize she isn't stretching. She's drying her legs, and the leotard is in fact her body, pinked from the hot shower. Even though I visited her in the hospital when both of her boys were born, held the newborns in my arms when they still smelled of her, saw the raw cesarean split, it isn't until I watch her drying herself that I understand that she is a sexual being. And then the next time we speak, I can't help but blush and endure images of her in extreme positions. Mostly, however, I see the mothers I know in glimpses, bent like shepherdess crooks, scanning the floor for tiny Legos or half-chewed grapes, or the people they once were slumped in the corners. It's too much. It's too much. I shout at my husband some nights when I come home, and he looks at me, afraid, this giant, gentle man, and sits up in bed over his computer and says softly, "I don't think you've walked it off yet, sweets. You may want to take one more loop." I go out again furious because the streets become more dangerous this late at night, and how dare he suggest risk like this to me when I have proved myself vulnerable? But then again, perhaps my warm house has become more dangerous as well. During the day, while my sons are in school, I can't stop reading about the disaster of the world, the glaciers dying like living creatures, the great Pacific trash gyre, the hundreds of unrecorded deaths of species, millennia snuffed out as if they were not precious. I read and savagely mourn, as if reading could somehow sate this hunger for grief instead of what it does, which is fuel it. I have mostly stopped caring where I walk, but I try to be at the duck pond every night when the Christmas lights, forgotten for weeks now, click off and the pond erupts, the frogs launching into their syncopated song like a nursery school let loose in a room of untuned lutes. Our pair of black swans would shout at the frogs with their brass voices as if to shut them up, but outnumbered, the birds would soon give up and climb the island in the center of the pond and twine their necks together to sleep. The swans had 4 cygnets last spring, sweet, cheeping puffs that were the delight of my little boys, who tossed dog food at them every day. Until one morning, while the swans were distracted by our food, one cygnet gave a choked peep, bobbed, then went down. It came up again, but across the pond, in the paws of an otter that ate it in small bites, floating serenely on its back. The otter got one more cygnet before the Wildlife Service arrived to scoop up the remaining 2, but it was later reported in the neighborhood newsletter that the tiny swan hearts had given out in fear. The parent swans floated for months, inconsolable, though perhaps this is a projection, for since they are both black swans and parents, they are already pre-feathered in mourning. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Okay, thanks, everyone. And now my beautiful friend, Anastasia. Come on.
Oh my God. Hi, everybody. I still have to pinch myself every single day, but here we are. Okay. 15 minutes. A little background, inspiration, information. I was always inspired by collage and avant-garde. This is one of my favorite painters, Natalia Goncharova. These 2 beauties, to me, they look like folded postcards. And a couple more examples. On the left is Alexandra Exter, also does theater sets. So this is from 1914. And on the right is my homage and collage. This There's no Photoshop, so this is all built in space. I print out images and then I sculpt them. As Mia mentioned, I studied environmental design and architecture, so this kind of approach stems from making models of spaces and then rephotographing them with my camera and then printing those flat prints. But you can see some props over there. And this one was inspired by the news of dolphins reappearing in Venice canals during COVID when the water cleared up. It turned out to be fake news, but this is this is sort of a physical metaphor, a gesture of this kind of myth making. On the left is one of my favorite artists, Paul Citroën, his collage of this metropolis. And then on the right is, again, no Photoshop, my collage built in space called Subtropical New York City. And that was inspired by the news. I think the Times published in 2019 that New York City now qualified for subtropical zone. Yeah, because of the temperatures in consecutive 5 summers. This is what I thought I would be doing in Miami when I moved in 2016. These kinds of collages. So this is, again, it's a tableau built in space, but I was running out of material. And then I needed more, so I began photographing in the street just to gather more material for my tableaus. There's been a recent return to that kind of approach. It's a bit more mixed media now. I use paint as well. And these 2 collages are in the show upstairs. So in our current Florida show. The one on the left, you can see this is a billboard that I rephotographed, and then I painted around it. And then the spilled pink paint was just a few feet over, so I brought it back via collage. And you can see the obvious sort of intrusion of paint and cuts. While in Miami, I saw this incredible show by Bernice Abbott, Route 1. And that inspired me further to document what I was seeing. This kind of observational photography was fairly new to me, even though I have photographed events and other commercial things for a while at the time. And then I was teaching and making those collages. So there was, again, kind of new. But I realized quickly in Miami that I didn't need to build those sets. Miami was already a life-scale collage of itself. I only needed to use a long enough lens to really zoom in on those details and show all the layers. So side by side, the left is, a documentary picture. They're all documentary. There's no Photoshop in any of those in terms of splicing layers together. And on the right is a billboard in the street. And then often in those spaces between the printed surfaces, you would see flooded foundations and exposed rebar and all kinds of levels of rot. There's this beauty and decay. Another billboard on the right, you see the shadow disrupting it in a kind of cubist way. You can see on the right side, it gives away a corner of a street, and that billboard is still there. This is from 2018. On the left is a reflection. So all of those, again, a billboard and a real pool, an aerial picture, became part of a series called Flood Zone, which came out in 2019. But there were certain images that were not quite fitting into the environmental theme, even though this is what I studied. Things like this that I still liked. So I continued looking. This is a lost twig in the street by the railroad tracks. And the shape reminded me of Medusa, this sort of mythological creature. And then this is my shadow hovering over it. You see an abandoned phone on the bottom left. While shooting in Florida on the West Coast, I discovered that this is the Ringling Brothers Circus site, which is now a museum in Sarasota. And the entire construction, it's all painted this beautiful blush pink, my signature Florida pink. Walker Evans photographed that location for a magazine commission. And then they told me about this extensive archive from Florida. And of course, the Met has this archive digitized and very accessible. So it was convenient, and it didn't take too much effort to find those images online. That was an incredible discovery, and I thought that Evans was quite prophetic with his visual study of Florida. So this is one of the earlier pictures, and this is also in the show. And this is my mall in Orlando. The woman on the top left is kind of timeless, and then Cuba Libre on the bottom, and all this Venetian architecture, and this is just a mall. I love this quote. Sorry, it's so long. So this is from a letter that Walker Evans wrote in the 30s while in Florida. It was his first visit. And this is a list of things he wanted to find and photograph. People, all classes, surrounded by bunches of the new down and out automobiles and the automobile landscape, architecture, American urban taste, commerce, small scale, large scale, the city street atmosphere, the street smell, the hateful stuff, women's clubs, fake culture, bad education, religion and decay, the movies, evidence of what people of the city read, eat, see for amusement, do for relaxation and not get it, sex, advertising. I thought it was remarkable. He never mailed the letter, so he kept it for himself. And I took this list as a sort of structure for editing my quite extensive archive from Florida and potentially pairing it with the Evans's images of the state. And this is how this book was published in 2022. And it's on the bench in the show. You can flip through it. And this is the one with Lauren Groff's short story in the which was kind of an ekphrastic, but it's beyond that. Right? So this was inspired by this image of Venus Mirror. Again, there's no Photoshop. It looks like a collage, and you see many layers, but this is my shadow on the bottom left, and this is a glass vitrine of a shop. So it's photographed right through that vitrine. I'm standing in front of that mirror, sort of glass surface, and I'm shooting into the mirror. This is an actual collage that's also in the show. And you can see the many similarities in my approach. And this one could have been a collage, but again, it's a straight photo. The sort of incessant construction that goes on in Miami, despite the environmental risks. This is on Route 1. Gatorama, an old tourist attraction, sort of pre-Disney on US 27. I don't know if it's a gator or a crocodile. They're mixed opinions on that. I would like to find out, but the location is called Gatorama, so we just left it at that. It's a farm for both meat and leather and a tourist attraction. This is sort of when Evans said fake culture and then sex, I thought, well, he never really photographed it, but this is my my version of that. So it's a public-facing decoration in Miami Beach on a cafe. And then there's some police ride going on. And again, all these layers. And on the left is Walker Evans's picture from Florida of this interior. I think it was a preacher's house. It's in the show. Roadside gun shop in Port Orange. I love that turquoise. It was still, there's a lot to take in Florida. And I'm still, it's not, you don't get used to it. President's Hall of Fame, another tourist attraction. I just love how kind of forlorn they look, and it's plaster, and it's US 27, and they just stand there. Upside down house. Houses often end up like this after hurricanes. I can testify it's been 8 years in Florida and 5 hurricanes maybe in the last 8 years. Yes, and then you see footage of them ending up like this. But this is a tourist attraction, again. Quite dark irony there is in the show. This is one of my recent painted photographs. So it's a photograph of a tile mural on this public restroom by this really unattractive lake, middle of nowhere. And then it's sort of to enhance the establishment. The mural was placed. So the mural is original, and then I painted around it. So I printed my photograph on canvas and I painted around it to make it a bit more picturesque. And as you walk into the show, you walk through a hallway of postcards that are from Walker Evans's collection of postcards. Both him and I are quite drawn to the sort of vernacular and This is a king tide in Hollywood, Florida. So this is a flood. And this is a parking spot. Usually, if there are people in my images, it's people who asked me to photograph them. And maybe there's a bit of a gender advantage, so I don't look too intimidating. People feel free to come up to me. So this was the case. I was photographing the hand-painted sign. I love those. And Ali came out and asked me to photograph him. So this is in West Palm Beach. And I recently called him and told him he's in the Met. He's very excited and remembered me. This is a mural painting, a mural competition in Miami. Again, I love that there are multiple layers and signs. An abandoned building on a river that looks black and white, but it's not. You can see bits of color. There's greenery on the top. And this is multiple levels of sort of destruction on that building. There was a fire and there was a flood, and then now it just sits there like this giant skeleton. More pink, and who knows what caused that rust. It seems like it was, again, flood sitting in water. I love cars. Could make a whole separate book on cars. This is a very strong blast of wind over this chain link fence covering up the Deauville Hotel, where the Beatles recorded that show in 1964, the Ed Sullivan Show. And just that tells you a lot about the conservation in Miami Beach. The whole thing is now demolished. So it's been kind of destroyed by this first hurricane. There was a fire, and then it was allowed to rot by neglect because it was cheaper to demolish it than to restore historic property. New construction on the West Coast, to me, looked both kind of utopian and dystopian. Many of those formerly protected areas of land, so this is wetlands, the ocean is right there, are now being lifted. So the protections are being lifted, and then development occurs. And I always think about plumbing and where does that go? Last standing house in Mexico Beach. This is on the Panhandle. And I was shooting it a few years after that 2018 hurricane. There was this major hurricane where the eye of the storm is Category 5. The eye of the storm stayed in that area for several hours. So all the little tiny turquoise-colored pipes, these were houses. And you can see all these empty lots. Yeah, that house was built with about 20 to 30% over the required code for the resistance to the elements, and that's the only house that survived. So it's quite a different type of architecture that is now required for survival in the coastal areas. Upside down flag to protest the results of the 2020 election. There was another sign, but it was too on the nose, I thought. And I like the shape of the house, kind of insane. Public beach in Naples. I was actually shooting, there was some marriage proposal on the other side with neon signs and drinks and everything. And then I turned around and I saw him. And again, to me, he looked like a collage. There's so many statements made on his body. And the positioning of the gun tattoo is really curious and quite Freudian, I thought. There was also a girlfriend in the background, so I asked permission. Whenever I photograph people, it's usually some kind of rapport. They know I'm photographing, or I ask permission. Side by side, this is Walker Evans's poster on the left. This was a commission for the Fortune magazine in 41. And then on the right is an overpainted poster that I saw in Miami and photographed, and it turned out this was a street artist that made the poster. And then I liked all this, colorful layers of graffiti. None of the project has been sort of revisitation of Evans's locations except for this one. So this business is still there. It's Ribovich Boat Works in West Palm Beach, and it's still owned by the same family. So that's my little American dream here. They've never owned a boat. They just build them. I thought it was adorable. So this picture on the left by Walker Evans is hanging in Michael Ribovich's office. So this is the son on the right that I photographed. And then the last slide here. So this collage, which is now part of the Met's collection, ended up on the cover of my newest book, for which Mia Feynman has contributed an essay, and that is also available at the show, so you can flip through and look through the images. And that's it for me, 20 minutes, okay.
Okay, so thank you both for those presentations. I guess, Anna, you told me that when you were driving around Florida, photographing, from starting in 2016, you had a copy of Lauren's book of short stories, Florida, with you as a kind of a talisman and kind of a little source of inspiration and a feeling of something that you were looking for or thinking about. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what it was in those stories that inspired you or lit some kind of creative spark for you?
Yes. Is this on? This is on. Good.
Mm-hmm.
So many things. I thought I was done with Florida after the flood zone project. I felt like I've had enough of it, but then COVID happened actually, and then that 2020 was a really tumultuous time. 2019 leading into 2020, the country felt really divided, and as a visual communicator, I tried to understand the place, the country, sort of through this microcosm of Florida, but it's such an eccentric place and it's all out on display. And then it was Lauren's Florida short stories that inspired me to continue. Her take on Florida is like nobody else's. It's this darkness, this Florida Gothic. It is tough for me. I'm really not a word person. I'm entirely visual. But I picked it up, and I don't sleep very well, so this was my reading at night. I think it helped that it was so dark, and I would read on my ebook, and I would get inspired. And in the morning, I would wake up in this haze, and kind of like Walker Evans was making those lists in his letters, my list would be Lauren's stories, and then. Crazy enough, when I finally decided to reach out to her and try to meet her, a sinkhole opened up in Gainesville, remember? So I thought that was a sure sign that I had to go and meet her.
It wasn't just any sinkhole. It was like the size of a neighborhood. And there's some amazing photographs online. There's like a pool hanging over it for a minute before the pool collapsed in. So she came up. She didn't tell me that she was driving just to have coffee with me, because I would have
lied,
been like,
because I said I was in the neighborhood, but I drove 6 hours to meet with her for coffee.
and I would have made her stay with me and made her breakfast. But no, I feel so guilty about this now, actually.
I'm coming back.
Okay,
Lauren, you ended up writing a story for Anna's Florida's book, inspired by that photograph, Mirror Venus. The story is from the point of view of a young mother who escapes from her own life and spends a few hours alone in a luxury hotel in Miami. I'm wondering for you, is Florida, in that story, it's a place to escape to. But is it a place, you live there, you've been there for a number of years, is it also a place to escape from?
Oh, yeah. So I've been there for 18 years. And Anna and I mean, I don't mean to speak for you, tell me if this is not true, but the way that we live in Florida is by leaving it, right? I mean, in some ways.
Precisely.
Yes,
and
yeah.
On that first coffee date, I think both you and I were just trying to understand. And then I said, how do you live in Florida? And you said, how do you live in Florida? And then what you said, I thought was so profound. And I absolutely adopted that as my motto. You said, well, the artists can't be too comfortable with their environment. Otherwise, where would the art come from?
Yeah, you cannot write or make art from the center. It's not possible. You can't see well enough, right? You have to be able to take many steps back in order to see better. So yeah, that has been my comfort for 18 years, to be perfectly honest. And it's a great place, right? It's a spectacularly beautiful place. It's really fucked up place in interesting ways. And that's really, really good for art. So I have to say, I saw her work before we actually met. you had a bunch of photos in the New Yorker, right? And then there's this image of a rooster head floating on water, and I was like, "Oh, this lady's gothic! Like this is the way that I see Florida." Also, so there's this simpatico element about seeing and vision and darkness in the Sunshine State that I responded to before I even met you.
Yeah, and I think just even when you say the Sunshine State, it's such a construct. And the reason why I showed these collages in my part of the talk is because my work deals with this idea of this dichotomy between the construct of the facade quality of things. And maybe it's because of where I grew up. There's this presentation, there's this sort of propaganda, there's an agenda. Every image is loaded. The narrative is prescribed. And with Florida, it kind of owes its existence to the idealized images of itself. And I found so much beauty there, but it's not that kind of tourist beauty that they keep selling to the tourists and all these real estate developers.
And Lauren, you said you can't make art from a place of comfort, and that I think, and Anna, you've talked about feeling like a kind of an outsider, as an immigrant, and as someone who from Moscow sort of transplanted to Miami. Can you talk a little bit about how that informs your work? This sort of insider outsider point of view.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Actually, it's at the core of my work as well. I started in America in the Midwest. So this was early 2008. It was January 2008. I came for an MFA school in Illinois. Maybe very few people have heard of a place called Peoria, Illinois. And I think I was maybe one of 5 or 6 people with an accent. So this feeling of an outsider was severe, but not, speaking of uncomfortable, this is where I was making still lifes in my space. Those, the tableaus that I showed, that was part of an artist residency. The feeling of not belonging was with me for a long time, probably since childhood, again, because of where I come from. You find your people. But what's so beautiful about Miami specifically, I can't speak for the rest of Florida, is that I'm one of all the outsiders. Everybody came from somewhere else. It's really a place of first generation immigrants. Most of my friends are Latin American. So it's Venezuela, and there's Caribbean, there's Haiti, right? So my artist community. And in that sense, there's this kinship, and there's this mutual kind of creation of your belonging from all those outsiders, and there's, I think the primary beauty is in that.
May I ask the next question? So you were driven by feeling like an outsider. I mean, this is something that it allowed you to do the work that you can do. We are currently sitting in the Met, where you have a beautiful show happening, right? An exhibition. I don't know if you could be more of an insider now. So how are you going to maintain this feeling? I'm actually asking for myself. How are you going to maintain this feeling of being an outsider, even while you're being embraced?
Does that feeling ever go away for you?
No.
I think maybe there's some pathology. It's just so ingrained. But also, it's not a feeling, it's not a kind of depressing thing. It's not like, well, this is sad. No, it's out of that comes a sense of immense curiosity, and is this desire to understand, and sort of also early onset acceptance of this kind of non-belonging, nomadic lifestyle. It's not fully nomadic because both you and I are grounded with families. But Florida, for me, Florida is possible because I travel so much as this sort of base. And I don't know where I could possibly just settle and fully belong. But again, comfort can be suffocating. So maybe I would run again. But right now I'm working on a new project called the Atlantic Coast. So that's sort of broader geography. It's my usual themes overlapping, but it follows Berenice Abbott's Route 1 project. And I started that in 2020, and I'm building up on that archive, but now it's the biggest push. And again, everywhere I go, every state, so this is from Maine, Fort Kent, Maine, to Key West, Florida, I find Florida everywhere. So in that sense, that you kind of, yeah.
I find it by finding new things to be angry about, to be perfectly honest. And there's no shortage in the United States of 2024 to be full of rage and despair and dread. Yeah, I think it's maybe less of feeling like you're in the center than more feeling like you're comfortable. Nobody wants, we shouldn't feel comfortable.
We're comfortable with each other, so it helps to have, it helps to have this. And like you said, the Met, it's absolutely surreal for me to have this show still every day. I can't believe it. And sometimes I go up here and I just sit in the gallery like a ghost, on the bench.
Watch people watching?
Oh, it's the best thing
that's
ever.
Amazing.
And of course, now I'm trying to get hyped up for this new project. And so my favorite thing is overhearing what people pick up on. And then I should need to be a better note taker. But that's why I depend on the writers and editors so much. And I think in that sense, this is this forever collaboration. I don't think of myself as a solitary person. I'm solitary on the road, but I'm, as an artist, like I'm not a solo creature. It's this whole rhizome, it's this whole, yeah.
Oh, we're thinking about a project where we go on the road together in like this old 1960s convertible, and we both take pictures and we both write. And I think it's going to be incredible. It's going to be so much fun.
I write with 10 words. I have 10 words.
I take terrible photos.
There's a new book of your work out this year called Adaptation, along with a survey exhibition at the Saatchi Gallery in London, which is open now at the same time as your show at the Met. So it's kind of a special year. What does adaptation mean to you? Why that title?
When we were thinking about the title for the book, and since this is a survey, for lack of a better word, of all of my work to date, I thought if there was one word that defined my life, both personal and as an artist, it would be adaptation. It was cultural adaptation for me, continental adaptation, climatic adaptation in Florida. And then the work that I make, it sort of adapts something. It's always kind of meta. So the collage adapts other people's images and the vernacular images and the media images and billboards. So it's sort of found images that are incorporated into my work. And even if I'm making straight photographs, so documentary, observational, direct photographs, they're referential of something else. Either I think of them as this kind of subverted postcards, the ones from Florida especially. So there's this meta element. It's very aware of the history of photography. Yeah.
What's the most unique thing about Florida?
Oh, I don't think we can use those words together. Okay. Well, the thing that you wouldn't think if you are from upstate New York like me is that there are prairies, and on those prairies there are wild bison. And these are the places I like to run almost every day. When you go out there as the dew is sort of shining on the stalks of the grasses, and you see the sandhill cranes, which make it sound like old-timey washboards, and you see the bison off in the distance and the horses that are the descendants of the conquistadors' horses, and you feel surrounded by ghosts in a really profound way, because the limestone doesn't absorb ghosts. I don't know why, but it's a very haunted space, and it's a very vivid and living space at the same time.
And I think Lauren's Florida is slightly different than my Florida, because you're in Central Florida and you're very much with the moss kind of Florida. We don't have any moss, it's all coastal. And that was my lifelong dream, to live by the water. I just didn't realize the costs of that, psychological costs as well, because the anxiety is very high, and right now I'm supposed to fly back on Wednesday and I have to monitor yet another hurricane that's coming from the west side. So it's very real, but it is quite majestic, and the heat maybe that creates a sort of this drugged state. It is so hot, and I try to photograph in the morning. That's why my light is very particular, and the colors come through, in their most vivid form. Sometimes actually I shoot digital, so I have to desaturate a little bit because nobody will believe that palette. It's really intense. But it doesn't get old seeing manatees and dolphins. And I live, my studio is on the canal, and dolphins sometimes emerge from this kind of murky water, the same kind of water where the chicken head floated that turned out to be a Santeria ritual, this religion. And then I live on the beach, and I have the sliver of the ocean that I can see. And right now they're building a hotel right in front of us, of course. Very typical, so it's going to block my view. But there's one point where I can see it, and just this horizon line, this uninterrupted horizon line, that is my meditation.
Ooh, yeah. Let me just say, I mean, the natural world in Florida, as much of it that we can protect, is so extraordinary, and it's beyond anything that I've ever experienced. I'm from up here. I live in New Hampshire in the summer because I can't hate the heat. I hate the heat. But the Florida is a monkey bread of a state. We also have these 72-degree natural streams that come up from the aquifer that you can float down on inner tubes for 5 hours at a time and just sort of float and look at the birds and sort of be in the jungle and be really, really secure that no alligator is going to eat you because it's too cold, right, for them to actually live in these streams. So we have so much, right? A manatee will never get old. The bird life will never get old. And so we just need to keep Ron DeSantis from turning all of our state forests into hotels, which is something that he wants to do, actually, hotels and golf courses.
One more thing about uniqueness, and it's maybe not unique to Florida, but these really vulnerable geographies. I feel like everybody in America should spend a month in Florida. It's just mandatory. Then you will change your ways. Because unlike any other place I've lived in, so I was born in the South, but I grew up in Moscow and then I lived in Midwest. You feel like, we feel sort of good about our infrastructure and architecture. In Florida, with an impending hurricane, you feel so small. And even, with my images, I try to convey that. It does feel like nature can just take over at any moment. And the scale of you and this sort of idea of the Kantian sublime, it's so overwhelming and your proportion really shrinks. And I think that would be healthy for everybody to experience. Yeah.
Also, there's no difference between indoor and outdoor in a lot of ways. I mean, in my house, we have a 1904, which is very old for Florida, wooden house. So we've got lots of termites and all sorts of things. But we also have this lizard, or maybe family of lizards, that have lived in an air conditioning grate inside the house for so many generations. Now they're sort of like albino, pale lizards, and they only come out in the night. And so sometimes when I'm really sleepless, I'll just sit there reading and wait for them. They're my little oracles. So indoor and outdoor, it bleeds together. The permeability of the state is really astonishing.
Has your work ever been censored?
Oh, yeah. So Fates and Furies is banned in a couple of counties in Florida. I mean, there are 5,000 books, unique titles, banned in the state of Florida at the moment. So it's not unusual. But
Yeah, well, and this is something that your bookstore specializes in. Is that legal? Are you allowed to sell them?
Oh, okay. So when we say banned and challenged, it's the public libraries and the public schools in which because they take state money. But because the bookstore is a business, a small business, because if you're going to fight Republicans, fight them on their own playground. And the other thing too is that we have a nonprofit as well that gives away, like Dolly Parton, all the banned and challenged books. Just like, and so it's really lovely. So yes, it's legal now. If it becomes illegal, this is part of our machination. I want to be the bookseller who gets arrested because I have a big microphone, right? And I can actually make a big fuss if that happens.
What about you? Have you
Um,
ever censorship or self-censorship?
Guess we'll find out. this, this is the most prominent venue I've ever exhibited in. In terms of, to make a grand statement, I'm only a photographer, a documentary photographer, because of America, because of the First Amendment. So I have been stopped in the street and made erase my images back in Russia in my teens. And so I did not persevere with my photography because it can be simply dangerous. You can disappear and nobody will ever find out. And so here, there's ACLU, and I consult it, and I'm in public space, so I can photograph anything in public space. In Florida, I need to be cautious because I can get shot if I trespass accidentally. It has happened to people, but otherwise, no. So far, so good.
That's good. The tourist industry is a huge part of Florida. A lot of when people, when children think of Florida, they think of Disneyland, Disney World, and there are the hotels and the beaches. Is that something that ever, makes its way into your work, Lauren?
It hasn't, because I don't spend any time there, and I actually have a pathological fear of Disney World. It's just like the constructed world that has no irony about itself really freaks me out. So my kids have gone multiple times. I just can't. We're an hour and a half away. It creeps me out. Have you?
Yeah, well, I much prefer the tourist attractions. They're quite popular, the springs.
Oh, the springs. Yeah, but they're way far north of you.
Yeah.
I mean, they're 7 hours north of Miami.
Yeah, and in the South, I'm in Miami, so I stay away from the Miami beach crowds. And if any, Miami Art Basel, I do that thing and participate because it's officially called Miami Art Week. It's beyond just the main fair. Everybody kind of puts the best show on display, all the museums. So it's very vibrant, and there's a right way to do it. And then Mia, you visited for research and to look at the collages, and we visited Vizcaya together.
Oh. Yeah, that's old Florida.
Yeah. Vizcaya is this estate that's been turned into a state park, I think, and it's beautiful landscape and buildings. And you have one photograph of this pavilion that's out in the water that I guess floods during hurricanes.
And we were chasing a peacock. It's
Yes,
really easy to get
chase a peacock,
seduced by Florida. So for me, it's this sort of love-hate relationship in equal measure.
I think we need to wrap up. Maybe I guess maybe one last question, which is, you mentioned DeSantis. How do you feel about the future of Florida in terms of, you're as artists, is it a safe place to be? Is it, do you see yourself there long term?
Was your funding cut as well? We lost a lot of funding this year.
Oh, so DeSantis just stripped, I think it was $70 million out of the arts in Florida this year, just because he's mean. And he's stripping education out of the state-funded university system. So UF grads would not recognize their university. New College, as we all know, has been turned into Christian nationalist college, and it used to be sort of liberal arts like Amherst or Williams or something like that. So we will have a Florida. It will be gunslinging, a Wild West, and we'll always have artists because wherever there's authoritarianism, there's art, but it may have to be underground. If I'll make it, who knows? I'm trying my best. I have to be there because my husband took over family business and you can't get out until someone dies. And that someone may be me. But, I think And the other thing too is I'm a person of privilege. If I don't fight, who's going to? So I 100% support and love my transgender friends who've had to leave the state because it is not safe for them. Absolutely, right now, I would never. We're trying to build this space to protect them, but oh my God, it's really, really hard. My LGBTQI plus friends are all having similar issues too. I mean, everyone right now is really scared. But, we have prevailed in the past. I think we will prevail in the future. It's just that we need to figure things out fast and work really hard together. That's it. I don't know if I'm going to stay forever, but as long as my kids are in school.
Yeah, I second that. I'm there while Lauren is there, and our kids are about similar age. It is not a safe place for young women anymore. There's a lot to channel. So I'm looking forward to my next fast car ride. That is how I channel my feelings. So Florida, I sort of left it. It's part of my Atlantic Coast project, but it's kind of last on the list this time. And so this new Florida, or transformed Florida, we'll see what shows up.
Honestly, I'm most worried about the environment. And we are so fragile in terms of the environment. So we're going to need to start now protecting the spaces. Yeah.
Okay, well, I hope that you two have a great time in the fast car, taking pictures and writing together. Thank you all for coming and listening and being a wonderful audience. Please come back and see the show. It will be up through May 15th in the Gilman Gallery, which is on the second floor by the Rodin sculptures. So thank you.